Good morning. Welcome to the Woodrow Wilson Center. This is a very distinguished crowd we have with us today, which is befitting of a very distinguished panel that we have before us. We welcome the Ambassador of Italy. Good to have you here. Good to see Frank Islam from our National Cabinet. And I'm sure I'm leaving out others I should be recognizing, but welcome everybody here. It's good to have you at the Woodrow Wilson Center. This is the signature event in a series we've been doing on energy. It's our energy initiative led by Jan Kaliski. You'll hear from Jan in a moment. It is based around a book that he and David Goldwyn did, and if I can
Please.
grab it as a prop here.
Hold it high.
It is this short book. You can all read it by tomorrow. It is truly an expert take. They've actually done 2 editions of this, an expert take on energy security, or energy and security, as they say, looking at global trends in energy around the world and then putting it together and looking at where we're going globally. Today's event is, we have looked regionally so far at Eurasia, we've looked at East Asia, and we've looked at North America. We'll be continuing on Africa, the Middle East, and other parts of the world as well. But the idea today is to take stock globally, where are things going? And we're obviously at a time when oil prices are dropping, where there are a number of conflicts around the world in which energy is in one way or another part of the equation. And there's another opportunities in places like North America, where energy is also a huge opportunity in people coming together. So you're going to hear really a broad overview today on what the trends are. This is an issue that matters a great deal to the administration, matters a great deal to the Congress that was inaugurated yesterday, and hopefully some ideas will come out of here that direct our thinking for the future. We would invite you to continue being part of these discussions as we move forward on the regional discussions, but I know today you're going to have a fabulous overview of the entire world, and you'll hear later on from the Secretary of Energy himself as well, Ernie Moniz, who will be here around 11:30. Let me turn this over to Jan Kaliski, who is a scholar here at the Woodrow Wilson Center, has a long background in government as well as in the private sector, and we've been extremely fortunate to have him join us at the Wilson Center and to lead this energy initiative. So Jan, take it away.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's a great pleasure, and thank you for your very kind welcome and introduction. And as Andrew mentioned, this turns out to be a particularly appropriate time for the signature event in our regional and global energy series here at the center. And also, as Andrew mentioned, we'll be joined by Secretary Ernest Moniz about 11:30, so we can look forward to that. In the meantime, we're very fortunate to have a panel consisting of Ed Morse, Ana de Palacio, and David Goldwyn. We were going to be joined by Leon Firth, who unfortunately had to duck out because his wife is having surgery today, so he sends his best to us. Ed Morse heads Global Commodities Research at Citigroup and will help launch us on the 2015 Global Energy Outlook and key issues in today's low oil price environment, which is very much on everybody's mind. Ana de Palacio is the former Foreign Minister of Spain and will speak to the 2015 European Energy Outlook and key issues in the EU and the EU's neighborhood, including Ukraine. And David Goldwyn, my good friend and colleague, is the former Special Envoy and International Energy Coordinator under former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. And David will focus on the U.S. domestic and foreign action agenda based on Ed and Ana's remarks and as a segue to Secretary Moniz. In fact, before becoming Secretary, Ernie Moniz joined Ed, David, and me as authors in the book that Andrew kindly held high for all of you to look at, and there's a sample of the book and even order forms, and that's the end of the advertisement outside of the auditorium. The book was published by the Wilson Center Press and Johns Hopkins University Press. Energy and Security, and the subtitle of our second edition is Strategies for a World in Transition. And little did we know what this transition would be when we were putting this together. Second edition already in its second printing, and it's a book that offers both regional and global perspectives on energy, the environment, and technology, and serves as a framework for our bi-monthly energy series here at the center. In the book, we acknowledge the progress made, especially in the domestic front, although a lot more has to be done. And we point out that has to be done not just here domestically, but in developing regional and global policies. And we propose a global energy security system, or what we call GES, with 5 main components. First, to propagate the unconventional energy revolution abroad. Second, to create a global natural gas market. Third, to forge greater coordination of emergency response measures. Fourth, to lead a multilateral effort to end energy poverty. Over 1.4 billion people still do not have access to electricity in the world. And fifth, to commit to global engagement and protection of sea lanes. So that is a kind of framework that you see toward the end of the book, but it's full of other very interesting ideas on both the regional front and the functional front. With the shift of the global energy balance from east to west and the advent of lower oil prices, we have an opportunity to make real progress on this agenda, and more broadly, environment, energy, and technology. And I look forward very much to our panel's views on these items and more on our policy agenda. And without further ado, I will segue over to Ed, Chief of Global Commodities Research at Citigroup, who will get us going on the overall situation we face in the year 2015.
Thanks very much, Jan. Good to be here with people who I've been friends with for a very long time. The chapter that Amy Jaffe and I were responsible for in that big book was one that came close to proclaiming the death of OPEC. We asked the question of whether OPEC was likely to be as important in the next 45 years as it was in the previous 45 years, and the answer was almost certainly not, due to structural changes happening in the world, structural changes within oil-producing countries, as much, if not slightly less than, because of the consequences of high prices and bringing to bear new technologies to exploit resources, including U.S. shale resources that previously had been beyond the competence of commercial exploitation. A lot of what we said in that chapter is started unfolding significantly in the last part of 2014, and in many ways sets the stage for 2015, which opens with significantly lower prices than the year before had opened, and opens with a significantly additional disruptive changes that are likely to be occurring in the oil market over the course of the next few months, the next year, as oil prices test the cost of producing oil around the world, including in the United States, and has as one of its consequences kind of unknown, disrupted, unintended consequences that result from a world of ultimately lower oil prices. So what are the three trends that the market is starting with now, trends that are continuities from what had transpired in the latter part of last year? First, we have a weak economy. Last year, we reckoned that global GDP growth was around 2.7%. That compares to expectations of 2014 GDP growth as of the middle of 2013, for 2014 to see 3.5, 3.45 or 6% GDP growth for the world as a whole. A lot of that decline of some 0.9% in the GDP outlook for the world really was situated in emerging markets. China, which performed less well than people had thought, the other large emerging market countries as well, including India, Brazil, Russia, for obvious reasons related in part to sanctions, and Turkey. So there was a radical deceleration of growth in emerging markets. We think this will be a weak year too, although it's probably not going to be as weak as world economists currently expect, and that's because low oil prices tend to have repercussions around the world in terms of spurring on economic activity. The IMF blog has had some very interesting calculations on this. Our own calculations are similar to those of the IMF. We expect that if prices stay more or less where they are, the GDP impact of that globally by the first or second quarter of 2016 could be as much as 0.1% of GDP growth. And that will bring with it more oil demand, although probably less demand than has traditionally been associated with global GDP growth, largely because global demand has become less energy intensive, less oil intensive, and China is kind of leading the charge among emerging markets in seeing its GDP growth losing the oil and energy intensity that it had for a couple of decades before 2010. A second feature of the market has been the shale revolution in the US. We expect that to continue. We expect that there would be no way in the first 6 months of the year to show a decline in the rate of growth of US production. So US production is likely to grow by a rate of growth of over 1 million barrels a day per year for the first 6 months of the year. And then the consequences of lower capex on the upstream will kick in probably in an accelerating way over the rest of 2015, such that by the end of the year we expect that U.S. production growth will have slowed down from 1 to 1.1 million barrel a day increment on an annualized basis to something on the order of magnitude of 200,000 or 300,000 barrels a day annualized. The third feature of the year has been Saudi marketing problems. And yes, the Saudis are selling less crude oil. They're consuming more production at home. They have more refining capacity than they used to. So rather than being an exporter of 7.3 million barrels a day of crude, they're around 800,000 or 900,000 barrels a day lower than that. Still the largest exporter of crude in the world. As they discovered over the course of 2014, they were losing market share considerably. In the U.S. market, they were exporting around rounded 1.6 million barrels a day, just under that. In the last 4 months of 2013, in the last 3 months of 2014, it looks as though they're exporting less than 850,000 barrels a day to the U.S., a drop of more than 45% over the course of a year. They found it very difficult to market that crude elsewhere, Europe, because of difficulties in the European refining system and competition against other crudes. China, though, in particular, where their exports have been falling and where their market share has been falling even more, and where, due in part to U.S. sanctions and Chinese buying habits, by buying oil on a pre-export basis, the market available to those competing in a market are shrinking, and particularly in a country where we reckon incremental oil product demand last year was less than 2%, and where we think it'll be less than 3% in 2015. So we've had this well-publicized clash between Saudi Arabia and the shale revolution in the U.S. As the market unfolds. Very briefly, we think the market will be very much more disruptive in the coming weeks and the coming months. We have a new pipeline structure open to bring Canadian sour crude to the U.S. Gulf Coast market. The flows going through the Seaway system at the moment look as though it's an incremental 400,000 barrels a day coming from Canada into a market where competition by the Saudis, Venezuela, and Mexico, among others, is particularly acute, and this will probably have pose significant challenges to sour crude producers on the U.S. Gulf Coast, to say the least. We have Iraq ramping up. We have Russia increasing exports, actually, into Europe, all coming in the first quarter, leading to lower prices in all likelihood if we separate the financial flows from market fundamentals, but weaker market fundamentals going into the second quarter when oil demand tends to plunge compared to the middle of the winter. So we think there'll be much more difficulty ahead before the market begins to settle. Markets balance. They always balance. It takes a long time to balance. There are many ways that the market can balance. I suggested one in terms of lower increments of U.S. production growth by the end of the year, and another increments of higher demand by the end of the year. But I think the year will be challenging because of the unintended consequences of very low oil prices on things that we don't really know about. We have OPEC countries, OPEC other than Iraq, by the calculations of Adam Szyminski's EIA, calculated that OPEC revenues other than Iran were around $825 billion in 2013, and it looks as though their recent calculations are going to be on the high side, and it may be that 2015 will bring less than 400 billion of OPEC revenue, to countries that are challenged by fragmentation problems, by general governance problems, by problems delivering to their publics. The concentration of pain from lower prices is in sovereigns that depend on oil and gas revenue, whether they're OPEC countries or non-OPEC countries like Oman or Russia. And we don't really know the unintended consequences of this. I was in the GCC countries in the middle of December talking to more to locals and to expats who reminded me about the unintended consequences of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait raising production by about 1 million barrels a day right at the end of the Iran-Iraq war, when we in the world expected more oil coming out of those two countries. Oil prices went down, and one of the unintended consequences was the Iraqi taking of Kuwait. So we don't really know what the unintended consequences are, but they can be chilling, and they could give rise to more disruption. So with that, I'll pass
Thank you
the
very
baton.
much. And yes, over to Anna. And
Well, thank you. First of all, if I say that it's a great pleasure and a great honor to be here, for me it's not rhetoric, because this is the transatlantic relationship with content. And if there is an area where today, because of geo-economic reasons that you have hinted at, but mostly because of geostrategic reasons, there is a raison d'etre of this transatlantic bloc is precisely in energy. So now, a disclaimer. I will be with big brushstrokes. And when you paint with big brushstrokes, hey, you exaggerate. So my disclaimer is that the energy policy of the European Union is a policy on the making, but it couldn't be otherwise. And it has a lot of contradiction and a lot of issues, and we muddle through, and it's not easy. But honestly, this is this is work in progress. Why? Well, policy on the making. If you take the perspective of the European construction, energy is at the origin, the coal and steel, and then Euratom. These are founding treaties. And there was this ambition of having a common energy policy, but ambitions that have not yet been fulfilled. We have kept just pushing the common market in electricity and gas should have been completed in 2014. This was the last deadline. Well, it's not, we are not there. We are far from there. But this is issue. Today, as you know, all what is transferred to Brussels, which is all what we do in common, which is a best way and more descriptive way, what we do in common has to be in the treaties. In the last treaty of Lisbon, the one that just leads what we do, there is a important novelty, and you will say it's words, but we are a construction of law and by law, and this means a lot. It's solidarity. For the first time, we have solidarity there. As for the rest, a lot of contradictions. The community has he's in charge of security of supply, but at the same time, every member state has an absolute freedom to have its mix, its energy mix, and so on and so forth. The second issue is that in this evolution, we have gone from a policy in the 90s, when this policy that we are now in, just forgetting the initial Euratom and coal and steel, in the 90s, that was driven, it's market-oriented and short-term oriented, because this was before, in the 2000 and in the run-up to 2008, which is the other marking moment, the energy policy had not been yet hijacked by climate change policy. 2008 marks the moment where you couldn't mention in the European Commission competitiveness, because you would be excommunicated immediately. The only thing was there was no security of supply, there was no concern about the competitiveness. It was everything was geared towards this issue of climate change. Second second characteristic is this security of supply, which is really our biggest problem. Why? First, because of the resilience of our system. I will speak about it later. But because of our dependence, external dependence. Our external dependence goes to almost 90% in oil, almost 70% in gas, and 40-something in solid, in coal and lignite. Well, with this, how come that we don't try? Is this a fatalistically assumed situation? But we could do shale, never with the ambition that this would be a changer as it has been in this country. But the ambition should be there. It isn't. Nobody wants to have, it's not in my backyard, and therefore, this is very simplistic. There are also reasons of how our property legally structured. You don't own you have no rights on the what is under the. But the last thing is when people say, well, Europe, you have a reasonable mix. I say, well, okay, but this is not realistic. The European Union mix is reasonable, but it's not realistic, because then you have Malta that depends 98% on oil, for instance. Now, with this panorama, I think that I would highlight 4 challenges. The first is to keep a balance between realism and ideology. I mean, Europeans, we have bet on renewables. Okay, but I mean, do it realistically. Today, industrial electricity in Germany is 13 cents a kilowatt hour, while in Louisiana is 5.5 cents if my figures are good. Or another, residential electricity prices are more than double in Europe than in the US as an average. Take Spain, my country. Because of our betting on renewables, we generated a 30 billion, which for us, 30 billion euros, which is a lot of deficit that the government changed that by changing the framework at the expense of legal security. Now, the second challenge is long-term versus short-term. The first thing that we have to understand is that 60% of our infrastructure has to be renewed in the next 40 years. This means 2.2 trillion euros. But at the same time, what we have is that E.ON or GDF Suez is getting out of generation, that in Spain, in Germany, we are closing combined cycle plants because it's been many companies or many utilities are with the existing model are on the brink of bankruptcy. The third important challenge is to balance public and private. 2.2 trillion, there is no public money, and there must be a balance. You know that the President of the European Commission launched this idea of 313 billion euros in the next 3 years. Well, all this is for all infrastructure, and I don't know how much will be earmarked for energy, but this is not sufficient. We need to find a better balance between private and public. But we need to guarantee to go beyond this short-term vision. And United Kingdom is a good example. United Kingdom, they have bet on nuclear, and because nuclear means such a big investment, they have proposed a fixed price to guarantee the price. Today in Europe, many times the wholesale price of electricity is 0, which, by the way, doesn't benefit the consumers. We could speak about now. The last challenge for me is national versus European, because as I have hinted, we think that we have a market, but in reality, policies are made in the member states. For instance, did Germany consult going out of nuclear from one day to the next? Not at all. But this means a lot for the system. And this is something that there we have to really put our words and our deeds in order, because we speak about this internal market and we don't have. Now, if security of supply is important because of our dependency, this has a name today. It's Russia. It's Russia. Secondary name that could happen any time, but not to the same extent. We import around 14% from Algeria. But for the moment, the name is Russia. And this is concentrated today in Ukraine. And this is where this transatlantic community of interest and community of purpose makes sense. We need to stand together in the sanctions. But as you know, the sanctions for us are very important, for you are not that important. Many American friends told me Europeans will never accept the sanctions, Germans will never accept. We did, and we are there. And although there are some declarations that are more or less unfortunate, by the way, I open another disclaimer. Hollande did not say what he's said to have said. He said that if conditions improve, we should scale down sanctions, which is different from what we have been reading in the news. So, our policy towards Russia is a point where we really need to be together with these two aspects of sanctions first and to the support of Ukraine. Ukraine, we cannot expect a success story tomorrow. We have to be persistent and insistent, and they have to get their act together, but in order for Ukraine to have their act together, we have to support them and to support them in an effective way. There have been criticisms, and with this I finish, and we can touch upon in the there have been criticisms of what the World Bank or the IMF have been doing. Well, I think that these are not really that founded. But let's not forget, in the World Bank and in the IMF, between you and us, we are 37 or 38, us and you 16 point something, so we have the majority. So let's just put here together our deeds where our mouth is, and let's just understand that this is a challenge in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna, and now over to David Goldwyn.
Great, thanks, Jan, and thanks for your leadership on this series and the book. And I also want to acknowledge Robin West, one of our contributing authors, who's in the house today. Well, all of what we've heard this morning about economic volatility, potential political volatility, and policy confusion in Europe and other places begs the question of what we should do, what we, the United States, should do at this moment. And I would offer three framing comments. One is that, and this idea comes from Dan Yergin's chapter in the book, is that now when we talk about energy security, it's really not just oil security anymore. For the US, we're talking about comprehensive energy security, which is the security of the grid, the stability of the grid, the resilience of our system to manage disruptions. Oil is still part of that, but it's more of a comprehensive picture. The second reality, and it's a political reality, is that we can't really talk about ways to increase domestic production without talking about the climate and environmental consequences that come with it. This climate and energy are two sides of the same coin, and we're not going to have a reasonable political conversation about any of these issues unless we deal with both of those. And so that may mean as we try and grow the productive base that we also have to deal with issues like methane. But right now the polarization of the debate really just leads to paralysis. The third framing point is to avoid complacency. There's been a lot of conversation that we're self-sufficient, we don't have to care about the Middle East, or prices are low, we don't have to really care about production. And that's an understandable perspective if you're looking ahead 6 months. But this is really not the time to drop the strategic agenda. This is the time when we should be thinking about what's going to happen when we come out of this cycle, and what is our ability to act now when we have a lot of freedom of action. And right now, with things like low interest rate, I would say a slight economic competitive advantage, and that our economy is growing, this really is the critical time to act. There were a lot of suggestions in the book, probably hundreds of them, but I pulled 10 that are still relevant, that are relevant right now that I think we ought to think about. And our framing was that we had to take care of business at home before we take care of business abroad, so we have the credibility to lead. But there are 5 steps domestically which remain important. The first is investing in infrastructure. And this is really the time as we're building our economy where either investing in a smarter grid or a safer grid is important, but it's also building out the energy transportation system for the country. We have great production and it's not close to the demand centers. So we need a system of pipelines to move product north, to move product to the southeast, to move oil from east to west. And a lot of that, almost most of that will happen from private sector investment, but there's a lot that government can do to expedite that infrastructure, and it's good for the economy as well. We also have to think regionally, because it's not just us. There's an enormous amount of resilience that comes from our integration with Canada and our integration with Mexico, the ability to help each other in the case of an emergency, to have reserves over the border, so that's important. The second is that we suggest in the book, and there was a huge consensus around this, is a market-based approach to climate. And the option that we favored was a revenue-neutral carbon tax. Larry Summers came out with a remarkable editorial a couple of days ago talking about a different version of that, using some for infrastructure and for other purposes. We think revenue-neutral is probably the easiest to do politically, and it certainly polls very well. But a market-based approach to carbon, so we deal with this issue and we create a level playing field, and so we have some predictability about what the system will be. The third is to continue investing in the research and development agenda on the key bottlenecks, and those are really, for us, battery storage and carbon sequestration. And battery storage being the key to making renewable energy a baseload energy, carbon sequestration being the key for coal, which is a huge resource worldwide. In 2040, it's projected to be a huge source of consumption. We can't wish coal away. We have to find a way to deal with the emissions, and that might be high efficiency boilers, it might be carbon sequestration, but we've got to deal with coal. And so that R&D agenda, which is the Department of Energy's agenda, primarily needs to be sustained. The fourth is to harden the productive base. Another way of saying that is to make sure that we can sustain this really miraculous growth that we've had in oil and gas, which has been the biggest serendipitous boon for our foreign policy that we have had in decades. It has given us enormous capability, and we have to make sure that when we come out of this low price cycle, that we have the ability to sustain that so we don't go back to import dependency. And what we said we were thinking about it in 2011 and said it in 2012, was to liberalize exports both of natural gas and crude oil. A lot has been done on the natural gas front thanks to Secretary Moniz's leadership. So those exports are moving more easily, but crude is really next. And the issue is when demand picks up and our producers are below margin, will they participate in that rise? Will they be able to produce the supply to meet global demand or not? And that really means we have to just join the global economy in the way that others do. And so rather than saying, if you lifted the ban today, we wouldn't have much exports, now when the cost of lifting it is close to zero is the time we ought to think about how that is important going forward. It's also the way which, as gasoline prices will rise, and they've got nowhere to go but up, we'll be able to moderate that rise if we're able to produce to slow that rate of growth. And the fifth one, I think, is to address the climate repercussions of increased production. And that really comes down to methane and VOCs. And so the administration is thinking through how it's going to regulate methane, but you can't really have the conversation about how much we want to grow oil production and how much we want to grow gas production without acknowledging that it's going to have an impact on the climate, and that we're going to do it in the smartest, safest way is a good answer, but that has to have a concrete manifestation, and that is some sort of reasonable conversation about methane. On the international front, Jan mentioned the first of our recommendations, which is to extend this unconventional boom abroad. That's really teaching what we know, both about the technology, but also about the regulation. Because you would be surprised, or maybe not, about the great concern, particularly in European countries, but elsewhere, about whether they have the capacity as governments to manage the consequences of this production. People are worried about their water, they're worried about air. There are ways to do this. We have tremendous practices at the state level. We should be teaching that to others, and I think in this hemisphere, Mexico and Argentina are probably the two top candidates. It's also an enormous help for Paris, because if you're going to have serious climate reduction in the next decade, it's going to come from substitution of natural gas for coal and substitution of natural gas for diesel, and renewables will play a role, but it's not going to be the biggest role. So I think the more we can make gas cheaper, people forget gas is cheap here, it's not cheap anyplace else in the world, although certainly cheaper now than it was 3 months ago, that remains important. Creating a competitive market in oil and gas, really, part of that is exports, but a lot of this is the European agenda. What are we going to do in the G7 to make a real integrated market in Europe? We don't need to give, we can't deliver more LNG to Europe right now, but if you could sell gas point to point in Europe, if you had a real competition policy, if Gazprom couldn't buy the capacity and not use it in European pipelines, there would be space for other supply. So it's really helping the Europeans help themselves, but that's a diplomatic agenda for us and really top of the order. And Russia, Ukraine is the primary reason why. In our own hemisphere, Venezuela's pending implosion is going to put a big hit on Central America and Caribbean, which is dependent on their fuel oil. We've talked about that here before, but they have extremely high electricity prices, uncompetitive, and a lack of Venezuelan finance would blow a hole in all of their budgets. We ought to help them convert from diesel to modernize their economies, to use gas, CNG, LNG, and integrate renewables. But that will cut their emissions, it will cut their electricity prices, it would be a nice sweetener for Paris as well, and it's something that we can do. In Africa, Africa will be helped by low prices in gasoline, but traditionally is enormously harmed by the lack of resource revenues. So helping Africa get access to electricity is an important agenda. Some of that is distributed generation, which is to enable them to use gas where it's being produced and other resources, but some of it is baseload as well. And for them, it's also conversion from coal to gas. And in Asia, a highly insecure area from a resource point of view, obviously exports help on that agenda too. One pet idea that was in my chapter on the SPR is whether we ought to get a twofer. One is to help Asia get better oil security, and then to help ourselves repair and renovate the SPR by thinking about taking some of what we have in that reserve and selling other countries special drawing rights to access it. We have more oil than we need in the SPR, but I don't think we should sell it off or make it go away. But we could give other countries the right to purchase drawdown rights in that for some percentage of it, and that would help us finance the repair of the SPR, and it would give them what China has and others don't, which is an access to oil on reserve. And the final recommendation we have is a process one, and we're in Washington. Jan and I are both policy wonks, so we have to have a process recommendation, which is how we lead a government policy on energy. Not a comprehensive energy policy, which we don't and probably shouldn't have, but how do we lead government policy in these areas? Because it is still a hodgepodge and it is still a competition among agencies. And I think President Obama had a great idea with his council on energy and climate change, although the energy was a bit silent when that came out because there was so much to do on climate. But you have to deal with those issues together, and you cannot wag this dog from the tail. It can't be done despite what DOE is doing on the Quadrennial Energy Review and State is doing with its Energy Bureau, and all of the efforts come at part of the White House. You have to have White House leadership to pull these folks together, and you have to have somebody in the White House who ranks with the National Security Advisor to do it. An agency can't lead it. The Secretary of Energy, much as I wish he could, it can't lead the whole government because the other agencies won't listen. So our process recommendation was to reconstitute. That's a 2017 agenda now, but you have to have White House leadership on energy and climate, and neither one of them should be silent.
Well, thank you very much, David, and I will just ask a question of our panelists and then look forward to questions and comments from the audience before we're joined by Secretary Moniz. And the question is, listening to the recommendations that David gave to us, are there any others that you would add to, or any comments that you would have on David's list? In the context of the following question, we're talking about low oil prices. Some people feel low oil prices will be here for a longer period of time. If that is the case, does that shed any different kind of light on the kind of strategic opportunities or the proposals that David has set forward? Shall I ask for comments from?
I was going to comment on, the assumption of low oil prices for a long period of time. It's kind of a dangerous assumption, but
No, just a question. It's not an assumption.
Nothing cures low prices like low prices, and I suspect that there is a problem related to market operations that eluded that agenda, David, maybe, and that is markets left to their own devices are likely to exacerbate the cyclicality that we now find so profound in the oil market. We can see it in the shelving of projects that would be bringing new supply on in the framework of 2017-18 to 2022-2023, and unless there's some concern about, which is hard to generate in a period of low oil prices, concern about where that supply is going to come from, the markets will be tight and there will be inevitably an energy security problem on the horizon.
Well, I fully agree. I think that the main impact in the rest of the energy panorama is this issue of is how to assure that we keep long-term programs and with a short-term market reality. I want to make another comment, which is not this. I think that you have highlighted, and you are absolutely right about the regulation that you have put on shale and that you have you are experiencing. I think that this goes beyond. And of course, I'm going to do a pitch for the TTIP. The TTIP, from a European perspective, of course, we have the problems of the chlorinated chicken and the mechanisms to solve the controversies, and we cannot. I mean, this goes far beyond. And I think that one of the important corners of this TTIP is the energy chapter. And we should, this issue of being together on one of the biggest geostrategic challenges that we have, which is Russia and Ukraine, should just push us to work on TTIP and not to be hijacked by the exception, the cultural exception of France, or by how you measure if an oyster is healthy, that we measure it through the oyster and you measure it through the water that the oyster just expelled. Which, it's the sex of the angels. I'm not sure that if it was more abstruse a discussion. We cannot let this TTIP, which is geopolitical first, it's to be hijacked by this issue. And I think that working on the energy chapter could be a good cure for that.
Very interesting.
That's terrific. I mean, Ed raises an interesting point, which is about the low oil price cycle. I mean, I'm curious also on perspectives on how long it will last. I remember in 1998 when oil was $10 and people were panicking, and the U.S. oil patch was panicking, and it wasn't more than a year and a half before it went up from $10 to 18 to 20 to 25, and then we all got kicked out in early 2001. And the swing from 2008 was fast as well. So it turns quickly, and much more quickly than we think. And I agree, that's why we need to be prepared for it. But Ed, you're pretty close to this. How long do you think it will last?
Now that's a question that you don't like to be asked.
No, I think there are good reasons to think that you can find stability in the market for a period of time. Could be an extended period of time in a $70 to $85 range. Whether you want to debate over inflation adjustment is another issue, but I think there is something very new about the shale revolution that has a longer lasting impact, and it's hard to summarize it, and I'll do my best. We typically think of a conventional oil well exaggerated by very large reservoirs found in deep water, or large reservoirs found in Iraq, where you drill and then you drill and you drill more, and typically the first well that you drill is the most expensive, the cheapest, and then as you extend production and production conventionally becomes more difficult, it becomes more and more expensive, and the ultimate well before you close a field is the most expensive well. And we're seeing very expensive wells that are likely to be shut in this year because the cost of enhanced recovery is not worth it. It's just too high in a lower price environment. And the unconventional revolution in the US, the first well is the most expensive, not the least expensive, and each additional well is less expensive than the first. The rocks are really unbelievably extensive. They are not only extensive, but they're dispersed throughout the world. And I think, as we have seen in part on the natural gas side, and there are a couple of things to think about on the natural gas side. One is drilling for natural gas. Gas directional drilling in the U.S. is down about 78% from where it was at its peak, and yet each year we have more production than the year before. The growth of U.S. gas production from August through whenever the last EIA report was out for November is 4 BCF a day, 4.1 BCF a day. So you curtail drilling, but you still get more. But it's like an accordion. If the price incentive is there to drill even more, you can produce more. So we're changing from an expectation of a world where we've been used to thinking about the call on OPEC, and there are international energy agencies and others that talk about the call on OPEC. And it really is more like the call on shale, because shale is the expandable resource base that didn't exist before. So I think there is hope of escaping some of the history of wild swings between low and high prices. That depends on how much the shale revolution can be exported around the world, and what the market mechanisms are in those places.
Well, thank you very much, panel. And now it's time for the audience to put a few questions before we're joined by Secretary Moniz. I see a hand up there. Yes? And would you please identify yourself before making a question?
Did you say?
We have a mic that we'd like to hand over to you as well, right?
Did you say that the shale output would be how many million barrels or 0.1 million barrels per day in 6 months?
I said that the annualized rate of growth of production in 6 months is likely to be what it was over the last 12 months, namely a rate of growth of about 1 million barrels a day or so. And the reason for that is multiple. There are efficiency gains. For the first 25% drop in CapEx, there's going to be a cushion of a significant drop in the cost of services. There is a good half year of uncompleted wells. The cost of completing a well is very low. The cash flow generated from it is very high. So the structure of the system, if you add up, especially add up the Bakken, the Eagle Ford, and the Permian Basin, and forget about the others, is such that the momentum will continue that rate of growth for a long time. And it may surprise those who are testing the resiliency of the system, how resilient it is likely to be for a while in a lower price environment, yes.
But didn't you say after that?
Just another question back there.
Barrels after that, I believe.
Yes, I said it would slow down, because lower CapEx will slow down the rate of growth of production. I think it's unwise to say it's going to go negative, but it's going to keep growing.
Mic over to that there.
Hi, Ken Meyercord, World Docs. For Ms. DiPalacio, does Europe make its own forecast as to when United States natural gas might be available to Europe, or do you rely on the EIA estimates?
No, we really pray for it to happen as soon as possible, as you have said. frankly, it would be a symbolic, because of course it won't happen from one day to the other. It will take some time, but symbolically it would be extremely important, because the feeling of dependence on Russia for the gas, and we have mentioned many things, but of course the pipelines. I mean, the northern stream that links Germany to Russia, it's just Gazprom. Gazprom is today a European company. They own almost 25% of the storage capacity in Germany.
Thank you. Another question in the back that I see there, the lady in the back.
Hi, Sabine Muscat, writing for China Dialogue. I have a question for Ed. You've touched upon this briefly, could you say a few more words on how, in the short and medium term, low oil prices and coal prices will affect the energy mix and policy decisions in China, and also turning it around, perhaps in the longer term, how the slowing growth of demand in China will affect the markets for coal and oil for these commodities in the future? Thank you.
Yeah, but very briefly, I think since Chinese economy is partly top down, partly bottoms up, It's directed in many ways, and part of the direction is essentially to be able to produce twice the amount of electricity with the same volume of coal, to increase the BTU content of the coal being used, reduce the sulfur and ash emissions that would result from it. So I don't think low prices are going to affect the trajectory on Chinese coal demand, which the Chinese government and many people outside the Chinese government believe will peak before the end of this decade. I think the low prices will have an impact on the product mix significantly. The Chinese government has been very reluctant to accept oiling prices in LNG contracts. They kind of won that battle in dealing on a pre-export finance basis with Russia. A low oil price environment is a low natural gas price environment, and is one where a spot market is likely to provide a significant growing volume of gas imports into China, where the regas infrastructure is more than ample, also into India, by the way. So I think the lower oil price environment translated into a lower gas price environment will have an impact that will change the trajectory expected by agencies like the IEA on natural gas demand in emerging Asian countries.
Very good. Another question from the back there, the gentleman in the back.
My name's Thomas Grindley. I understand that a great many oil fields have become exhausted over time, leaving behind about 50% of so-called unrecoverable resources. Do you know if the recent developments, which have received a great deal of publicity, of oil recovery techniques will make it possible to revisit these oil fields and recover the unrecoverables?
Very briefly, the shale revolution has increased experiments on total recovery of fields that had once been thought to have become close to exhaustion. Recovery rates have gone up significantly around the world in conventional resources, so they can be as much as 25 or 30% of the resources in place, a number that is roughly double what it was thought to have been 2 decades ago. On the unconventional side, around 5% rounded of the known resources are currently expected to be recoverable under current techniques, but the technologies are growing at a rate yielding 20 to 30% gains per year, going from 5 to 15% of recoverability on the shale side should be accompanied by higher recoverable rates on conventional oil.
I think we have time for one more question. The gentleman in the red sweater there, please.
This for David, I think, mainly.
I
I'm sorry, Mike McCracken from the Climate Institute. I guess I'm curious about this notion of coal continuing and getting to sort of zero emissions with some sort of carbon sequestration technology. Is it really likely, and what are the kinds of approaches that are going to make that cost effective compared to the greatly decreasing prices for sort of renewables and other kinds of things as sources of electricity?
Well, I don't think we're going to get to zero emissions from any kind of coal combustion anytime soon. I guess the point I was trying to make is that pretty much every projection which looks at energy consumption in the developing world, even if they assume a very large share of renewables, assumes for baseload energy that coal is still the cheapest and therefore a very significant growing source of feedstock. And so in order to deal with, I think we have to deal with that issue. I think there are multiple ways you can deal with that issue. If you happen to have a large hole in the ground nearby, carbon sequestration would be a good answer. And for some countries, they do have those, depleted oil fields or other things. In other cases, it's going to be more high-efficiency boilers, which can, which compared to the kinds of coal-burning facilities you have right now would be a huge improvement over the status quo. And so if you're going to be in India or South Africa or China where you're going to have a huge amount of coal consumption, you at least want to steer them in that direction rather than having them not go that way. And there may be other technologies that the DOE Clean Coal program can look at, whether it's ways to capture the emissions that come out of the flue stack or ways to change the boiler or using better coal. I don't think any of those are perfect solutions. I guess my point is that it's a reality that these countries will be dealing with it. Renewables are not going to give them baseload. It's not going to be cost effective in a lot of places. So we are much better off continuing to invest in ways to minimize the impact of coal combustion than we are just trying to wish it away.
Thank you. If there's a quick question, I think we can do that. Do you qualify? All right, please.
Thank you. David Nelson with GE. For Secretary de Palacio, my question is, what's needed politically to get European countries to exploit their shale resources? If you were to encourage it, how would you encourage it? What would
The
be done?
first thing I would find a way to reward the owners and all those that get affected by the shale production. But honestly, this is not all. I mean, if in Spain, for instance, we have a big debate. It's not all. But one thing I would do is this. The second thing, I think, is that for many years in Europe, there was this idea of don't ask, don't tell in terms of electricity generation and generation in general. So people don't know really. We went for renewables, and this is fine. I'm not criticizing, don't misunderstand me. This is fine, but people don't know what it costs in the end because I'm not able to read the receipt of the electricity every month. I don't know what I'm paying for the renewables. People should know, and should know how, that it's not a fatality that we are bound to be dependent on imports, that we need to develop our own resources and, of course, efficiency. And on efficiency, the European Union is very good.
Well, thank you. On that very spirited note, let's thank the panel and look forward to Secretary Moniz's joining us very shortly. Thank you very much, panel. It's reserved right there.
The president and CEO of the Wilson Center, and the event continues with what I have termed as the rock star from the Energy Department. I'd like to welcome, I think we have several ambassadors here, plus a number of our cabinet members. I think the ambassadors from Italy and Lithuania are here, but I also see others who are very close and dear friends of the Wilson Center. We're thrilled to have Secretary Moniz here today. Ernie also joined us last October for an event on collaborative research targeting the Amazon, and he co-authored a chapter for one of our books, Energy and Security, about which I believe you've already heard, and that book frames this event. We're glad he's becoming such a Wilson Center regular. He's back to address the global energy picture for 2015. It's not an easy future to forecast. Who could have predicted that oil prices would slide as much as they did in 2014? but the geopolitical implications of that are huge for Russia, for Iran, and for consumers pumping gas here in the United States, and for those extracting fuels here in the United States. SUVs are back. Used Hummers are on the market again. I never thought I'd see the day, and I don't know that anyone saw it coming. But it's where we are. So, where are we going? Some pundits want to boil the energy outlook down to one number, the market price for a barrel of oil. But one number can't begin to capture the complexity behind global energy economies or international energy security, something very, very relevant to some of the problems in the Middle East and, unfortunately, those bubbling up in Paris and other capitals today. You have just heard a nuanced view of this problem from our panelists, and you'll hear a very nuanced view, I believe, from Secretary Moniz. Because this is what the Wilson Center does best, getting beyond the usual snapshots and caricatures. Too often, my former employer, Congress, tries to legislate without the whole ground truth, without a sense of difficulties and challenges. I served there for 17 years as a member and 5 years, decades before, as a senior staffer. So it's the Wilson Center's job to promote a sharper understanding, which is the best basis for actionable ideas. As the new Congress wrangles over Keystone XL, over Iran sanctions, over Cuba, this town needs creative, nonpartisan wisdom, the kind Ernie has offered during a long and distinguished career. A rock star, of course, but also a star nuclear physicist, a committed public servant, and a center regular. There's no one better equipped to address this topic. Please join me in welcoming Secretary Ernest Moniz to speak to us. You're welcome to speak from there or here.
Well, I'll just speak from here, Jane.
Okay.
Okay. Makes sense. Thanks, Jane, for the introduction. I interpret nuanced remarks to be reference to the fact this is a public meeting, and I will be very nuanced in that sense. Now, we'll try to spell out, not forecast, but spell out some of the issues, of course, that we are dealing with and looking forward to the 2015 agenda. Jane, as Jane mentioned, my colleague Melanie Kenderdine, who is sitting there, and I contributed to this very fine book in its second edition, and on energy and security, and Jan Kaliski and Dave Goldwyn, as the people who pulled that together, they were always very calm and not pushy at all in terms of our meeting deadlines. But I will say, I'll talk on four things briefly, because we have, I think, about 15 minutes, then we'll open it up to Q&A. But I want to say that the chapter that we wrote in this book was called Energy Technology and Security, or something approximating that. And it was laid out in a way that I would make some brief comments on. Its central construct was to lay out what we called energy security challenges, then to talk about policy responses to those challenges, and then finally, what are representative technology pathways to address those policy approaches to challenges. So, for example, if one looks at the first challenge in terms of concentration of natural resources and all the implications thereby, then, for example, some of those policy responses to that, fairly obvious: increased domestic oil, check. Reduced demand for oil, check. Provide alternatives to oil. I don't have to keep saying check every time. Alternative vehicles and drivetrains. We are seeing EVs, for example, coming in faster than hybrids did in the comparable time period, et cetera. On gas, of course, again, domestic gas, exports, working towards at least a global market. And a third area put in terms of concentration of natural resources were critical elements, rare earths, et cetera. You've seen just recently, very recently, how quotas have been lifted on that, because frankly, the attempt to control that market has, in some sense, backfired, both in terms of development of alternatives and, in DOE's case, the establishment of a innovation hub specifically around the issue of addressing critical elements. So you can, the technologies attached to those are pretty obvious. What I want to say is I think that's the way, A, we're trying to think about these issues. I think, B, and I'll address the other challenges briefly as well. B, I think we are making tremendous progress actually across the board. And C, as a broader issue, and this is again now part of getting to the issues of 2015, as we continue a very, very strong focus on technology development and specifically on the cost reduction of the technologies that we need to meet our environmental, our climate, and our energy security challenges. So my first point is that I think you all know we have obviously very robust technology programs at the department. What I want to emphasize is I believe they are central to having the policy developments that we are looking for, because when the costs come down of those technologies, Jane's former colleagues can have a much easier job in terms of addressing the policy issues, be they on the climate or on the technology, on the energy security side. I'll just mention, without going into detail now, that the other three overarching security challenges that we used in this chapter, where climate change as a security issue, in addition to being an environmental issue. Third, the potential challenges around nuclear power development, nuclear fuel cycle development, and nonproliferation. And finally, issues around energy infrastructure and supply chains. In the remainder of my remarks today, I will not go into, unless there are questions, the nuclear power and infrastructure and nonproliferation issues, but I will address climate. I will say more about our energy security agenda for 2015, and then on the energy infrastructure side, I'll tell you where we stand on what's called the Quadrennial Energy Review and where we are heading in terms of recommendations for energy infrastructure, resilience, and other challenges that we face. So let me first turn in my limited remarks to climate and give you an update and look forward to 2015 in terms of addressing and implementing the President's Climate Action Plan, the plan that was issued in June of 2013. That plan has three pillars. The one is mitigation, second is adaptation, and third is the international dimension that we need, particularly on the road to Paris. Mitigation, well, again, that goes back to a theme I've already touched upon. A big part of that, at least, is in fact the technology agenda. One of our programs, ARPA-E, was created in 2009, and we think it's been very successful. We will be strongly moving forward again with ARPA-E, and today, actually, I'm pleased to say today that we will be announcing the third open 2009, 2012, now 2015. There's a pattern. This will be our third so-called open solicitation. We're going to put out $125 million for novel technology ideas across the entire spectrum, as long as the technology is, quotes, clean, that is, advances a low emissions agenda. These open solicitations, you might ask, why aren't they done all the time? Well, for one thing, because they generate a lot of applications. The first round in 2009 had well over 3,000 initial submissions for what ended up to be 35 awards. So you can understand these are a challenge. However, we believe they are crucial in really opening up the aperture to all the good ideas that may come in. If you look at the 2009 open solicitation, for example, there was some very innovative work on wind turbines using jet engine inspired designs. But just a few days ago, one of the initial awards, perhaps the largest of the initial awards, happens to be at MIT, where I was at the time, to a novel technology called liquid metal batteries. And the announcement a few days ago was the commercialization of these batteries as utility-scale storage devices. And so that's an example of a brand new technology that came out in this kind of open solicitation. In 2012, similarly, an example was sensing and computer hardware that could be in a backpack-sized device that you could walk in and rapidly generate indoor physical and thermal, et cetera, maps of a built structure. So again, a really interesting idea that probably would not have been brought out in the more targeted solicitations that we do. So we think this is exciting in terms of really generating new technology ideas going forward. But let me also say that this will be a big year for our loan program. I hope some of you have noticed the change in tone of what's been written on the loan program. For a while, it was Solyndra, Solyndra, Solyndra. It turns out there's $30 billion in play in the loan program. The overall default rate has been 2%. Solyndra represents almost 2/3 of the default rate in that one project. But it has paid off in major ways. Utility scale photovoltaics, CSP, we could go on and on. But what I want to emphasize now is that we have just recently completed our full suite of call for proposals for an additional $40 billion of loan guarantee. That's $4 billion roughly in renewables and efficiency. These are set by statute. $8 billion for fossil technologies that lower emissions, roughly 12 for advanced nuclear technologies, and roughly 16 for new vehicle technologies, which probably will see more auto suppliers as opposed to integrated manufacturers coming forward. So we already have proposals in for many of those, renewables and fossil. We see strong portfolios, so I just want to make it very clear that we plan to continue to be very forward-leaning, very aggressive in terms of now the deployment side through our loan guarantee program. A different kind of mitigation push it comes from setting standards, efficiency standards, for example, and I want to say that once again, with 2 hours to spare before New Year's, we met our goal of actually 10 efficiency standards in 2014, double the amount in half the time relative to the previous 2 years. We're going to keep running through the tape in this administration with this, because the cumulative impacts of these through 2030 are projected to be 3 gigatons of CO2 reduction and nearly $500 billion of consumer energy savings by the accumulation of these many efficiency standards. So that's another area where you can expect to see very, very strong focus in this coming year. On adaptation, I'll come back to that a little bit when I discuss the Quadrennial Energy Review. Let me just say a word about international cooperation. And again, we can come back to this more in the questions, but obviously the joint announcement by Presidents Obama and Xi in Beijing, we think really changed a lot of the discussion in terms of international collaboration. This year, we will be working hard with the Chinese in terms of moving forward on the joint commitments. For the Department of Energy, It again goes back to technology, and we agreed to expand in scope, for example, adding a strong energy-water nexus focus, and to expand in scale our direct technology cooperation with the Chinese, including a commitment to move forward jointly, and we will invite other international partners to really push the edge in terms of understanding carbon dioxide sequestration with a new and much expanded approach to instrumentation, to understanding all the issues one needs to know about deep CO2 sequestration to allow, for example, the appropriate regulatory basis to be laid. So that's just an example of, that's a very important area in international collaboration. The other one I'll mention, it's quite fresh. Yesterday we had so-called high-level economic dialogue with Mexico, and that in turn followed a trilateral in December with Mexico and Canada in terms of energy. It's been a very, very positive discussion. One of the things we're going forward, I see my colleague Adam Szyminski out there from EIA. Adam is leading one of the agreed to thrusts in a trilateral context, actually, which is data and energy infrastructure mapping integration. Right now, we don't have very good data that goes across the three countries, and sometimes we do have the data, it doesn't agree. So getting data integration, we think is a very important foundational step. That's an example of a focus. But we will also have a very strong focus on infrastructure development, integrated infrastructure development. And with Mexico, for example, that will probably have, well, not probably, it will have a particularly strong focus on electricity integration. There's more than I think most of us might have realized already in terms of electricity going back and forth across the border with a seasonal footprint, but it's still rather lower than is the case with Canada, for example, where we import so much hydro. But that's an example going forward, and Mexico will be hosting in March the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas. A multilateral context for the Western Hemisphere, and we think this is very important, both for again our relationships with Mexico, the United States, but also looking at what is very clearly in Latin America a lot of progressive movement on the climate front on the way to Paris, and of course I should have said at the beginning that the Mexican energy reform is really extremely ambitious, and it is a lot of the focus in the discussion publicly tends to be in the hydrocarbon sector, but I do want to emphasize that reform is equally ambitious in the electricity sector in Mexico, and to the extent to which those market structures and regulatory structures become much more in sync with those in the United States, for example, collaboration and energy integration will just be so much easier. So that's just a few of the areas on the road to Paris that we will be looking at in terms of climate. In terms of energy security, and I think I probably don't have too much time left. In terms of energy security, let me say that a major focus for this year will be continuing a discussion, set of activities developed under the G7 context umbrella. It's a G7 activity in partnership with the European Commission. And I'll just focus on one piece of it, very important piece, the issues that were clearly put on the table with the Ukraine situation, looking at European, and particularly European, energy security. But the first point to make is when we say it's European energy security, we really mean it's the collective energy security of allies and friends. And so even if some of us may be tempted to have a complacent view of energy security in the United States because of our production. The fact is, we have a serious interest in the broader energy security issue with our allies and friends. It has huge geopolitical implications for us, and so that's a discussion that we are very, very deep into. Part of it was, first of all, presenting an updated view of energy security. It's not just about diversity of oil supply or natural gas supply. It involves many issues, including market structures, and we could go on, substitution possibilities, et cetera. But what we tackled so far were the difficult issues of things like helping Ukraine face the winter, et cetera. But this year, and that will continue, but this year, frankly, a harder issue. We are due to report on to the G7 Leaders Summit, and that is a real intermediate to long-term plan for integrated collective energy security. And that gets into some very fundamental policy issues in different countries, but that will be a big agenda item for this year. Finally, let me just say a few words on the Quadrennial Energy Review. Probably first I have to say a few words about the Quadrennial Energy Review. Some of you are familiar and some of you are not. This is an administration-wide effort that is looking to weave together all of the equities and threads of an energy policy across the government. This first year, we have taken the first of the quadrennial. Quadrennial to us is 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. And in the first one, we are focusing on energy infrastructure, transmission, storage, and distribution of energy. It's a pretty big bite, to be honest, but clearly somewhat restricted. The Department of Energy, through the Energy Policy and Systems Analysis Office, which I referred earlier to Melanie, which she heads, is really the executive secretariat for this government-wide effort. It's a major analytical effort. Let me just say a few of the things. We are looking to February as the time for getting out this first installment. It will have a lot of information about the situation of energy infrastructure in our country and also in the North American context. But it will also move on to make recommendations about what are some of the issues we have to address. I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but let me tell you about 4 areas that will be very much part of the agenda in the QER and for implementing in the rest of 2015 and beyond. One is, first of all, you might say narrowly, but our petroleum reserve really needs modernization, certainly in a variety of physical elements, and partly because of the changed production profile in the United States. The different geography of producing oil and gas has led to a number of distribution issues that we partially uncovered by doing a test sale from the petroleum reserve earlier this year. We will be laying out the program that one needs to address the petroleum reserve and the distributional capabilities of the petroleum reserve. Another big area will be the smart grid, by which I just mean, in general, the electricity delivery system, and particularly its integration with information technology, et cetera. Obviously, many reasons to drive that. For example, large-scale remote renewables integration into our system. But then again, on the other side of the T&D system, distributed generation capabilities and how we manage all of these in a reliable, resilient, robust system is clearly a major focus. We'll have some recommendations there. Another is related to the adaptation question that I skipped over in the Climate Action Plan. again, resilience, recovery, and safety of energy infrastructure. A lot of that will involve states, working government, states, and private sector, and we will be, again, moving that forward. It also includes addressing the infrastructure problems that were pointed out in the administration's methane strategy, the methane emissions as a climate challenge, but of course also methane emissions on the distribution side as a safety challenge, because we have seen, unfortunately, some of the problems there with literally 100-year-old pipe in some of our cities and major challenges. So we will be making some recommendations there. And finally, and I'll end, is in doing this quadrennial energy review, what has come into much sharper focus, for us at least, is the question of not just the energy infrastructure per se, the pipes and wires that move electricity or fuels, but also what we might term the shared infrastructures, the infrastructures that move many, many commodities, including energy. The poster child, of course, of that in the press now for quite a while has been railroads and the enormous increase in moving oil by rail. But again, I'm sure many in this room are quite aware of the enormous congestion in moving a whole variety of commodities. Right now, we have issues of coal in the upper Midwest because of railroad congestion. So that's one big example. And also a case where we have data issues, inadequate data, frankly, for understanding these flows and what they mean for policymakers. But I have to admit, I've learned a lot about other shared infrastructures. One that is, and I'll just mention one other one, inland waterways, in terrible, terrible shape, enormously important in moving lots of commodities. So we will be also recommending a variety of approaches to address these shared infrastructures, which are important for energy, but are important for how our whole economy works coming together. So that gives you hopefully a flavor. These are some of the big ticket items that we will have in the energy and climate realm for 2015. Thank you.
Great to see you.
See you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. That was an outstanding presentation, and even though it's 12 noon, I think we should, if it's all right with you, spend 5 or 10 minutes maximum. 10 minutes, I'm told by our Supreme Leader. So 10 minutes it is for a few questions. And let me just get the ball rolling by saying the words low oil prices and asking Secretary Moniz.
Relative to what?
Relative to what? But asking for any thoughts you may have. Larry Summers had an op-ed, as you know, on Monday, and there's been discussion in Congress about possible steps to have a carbon tax, which may be revenue neutral and that sort of thing. Is there any thinking that you would like to share with us in the low oil price environment, which, by the way, was the subject of considerable discussion in the panel that preceded your own remarks?
This is where the nuance comes in, Jane. Well, first of all, clearly we are trying to put together a comprehensive picture of what current oil prices mean. I do want to, of course, emphasize that it starts on the plus side, for sure, with consumer impact, impact on our energy-intensive industries, our manufacturing industries. There were some comments Jane made about the size of vehicles, but I would start by saying the number of vehicles sold has certainly gone up. So look, there's no question that obviously this provides a major consumer direct benefit. Also, we will see. We don't know yet, but one of the obviously great issues in the global economic situation is, for example, the rather, shall we say, sluggish European economy. If this could help get that really going, that will then come back and help in many dimensions. Now, clearly, there are also geopolitical questions that are difficult, and I can't stand here and say, or sit here and say where we're going, but we obviously have a whole bunch of countries that depend on especially oil revenue dramatically. Some friends, some others, and I just don't think we have can fully understand today what those implications are. We are thinking about them. We are looking at options, et cetera. Finally, of course, we come to the United States hydrocarbon industry specifically. And again, Adam Saminsky is welcome to pipe in. But Adam, the EIA's, I believe, still current as of a couple days ago, expectation is that we will still see increases in our oil production in 2015. The increase has been tempered, but I believe the latest number is still looking at getting up into about a 9.3 million barrel a day, whereas before it was 9.5 or 9.7, something like that. Now, clearly, if these prices persist for a long time, then the reductions in capex that we are seeing are clearly going to start coming in down the road. But right now, I think we're looking carefully. We're being prepared with analyses for alternative pathways forward, and right now, consumers are having the benefit.
Excellent. Okay, a question over there, and the mic will be made available. Please identify yourself.
I'm a public policy scholar here at the Wilson Center. Can you talk about what the role is for biofuels to remain in the future energy mix?
Well, I think well, first of all, we certainly continue to invest in biofuels. In fact, just in, I guess it was October, I was pleased to be in Yucatan, Kansas, for what is now the largest commercial functioning cellulosic biorefinery in the country. Our loan program helped put that into place. So, if I go back to what I mentioned about our entry in this book, first of all, actually, I think it's important that I'm sorry. Let me go back a step. As we celebrate our incredible increase in oil production with shale, I think we also do have to keep in mind that we still import 7.5 million barrels of oil a day. So we continue to have a very strong focus on reducing oil dependence. Reducing oil dependence has multiple threads. One is efficient vehicles, so things like the CAFE standards for light-duty vehicles, things like our super truck program for 65% efficiency increase for Class 8 trucks, et cetera, is very important. We continue to push alternative fuels, most especially next-generation biofuels are critical. Costs are not there yet, but they are coming down fast. Again, I think often, by the way, as an aside, we don't pay enough attention often. We tend to be some years behind in terms of where these cost curves are for many technologies. Third, we continue to DOE and obviously companies continue to advance electrification of vehicles. So all three of those are very important thrusts. But I think the high-level message I want to emphasize is we are committed to reducing our oil dependence even as we produce more oil. The big effect there, of course, has been in reduced imports of oil and the associated improvements in our balance of payments.
All right. Let's have a few questions at this point, and then we'll
Sorry.
have
My answers have to be
a
shorter.
comprehensive answer to do those. So there's one over here, and please identify yourselves. One I see over here, and one in the back. Okay.
My name is Jim Blanchard, former U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Governor of Michigan, and a member of Congress. I've dealt with these energy issues for about 40 years, and I never thought I'd see a day with incredible abundance, growing good technologies, growing renewables, awash in oil and gas here, none of which I realize we should take for granted. But what I can't figure out is why our president doesn't associate himself with such a good news story. And what can you do, Mr. Secretary, because we're delighted you're here, to make sure that the public gets the big picture and doesn't just focus on one or two issues, which always seem to be negative. This is a fabulous time, and the options that you have, that we have as a country, and North America has, the options are fabulous. How do we get the big picture out to the American people and to our own Congress?
Okay, the next question. Good, hard-hitting question there. Yes?
David Carpenter. I guess my question is kind of similar to the previous one right here. What is kind of your outlook for fuel cells and hydrogen energy? I know that the Tokyo Olympics, the Olympic Village is going to be powered by hydrogen energy and fuel cells. So if you can kind of go into that, I would very much appreciate it.
And finally?
Yes, I'm Richard Kennedy, a retired CIA economic analyst. And
one over here.
I read that some people at MIT are looking back at some of the early ideas for exploiting nuclear energy and finding that some of them look very promising in terms of both cost and safety. So I wonder if you could comment on that.
And now, really finally.
Lithuanian ambassador.
Right.
Paviljonis. Well, I just wanted to express gratitude for not only words but deeds of Secretary in building European energy security, like our common energy security. And as you know, on the eve of our 25th anniversary of independence, we just built LNG terminal called Independence. And our only hope for 2015 that U.S. increases its LNG exports for allies like Lithuania, that one day maybe we have American supplies as well. Thank you. Do you share that
very much.
hope?
Well, there's a smorgasbord. Over to you.
Okay. Maybe say a few brief words, maybe in the inverse order. In terms of our Lithuanian colleagues, and first of all, on LNG exports, just want to repeat where we are. To date, every application that has been prepared for a public interest determination, specifically meaning that it has completed environmental impact statement, to date, every one has been approved. We currently have approved, this is to non-free trade agreement countries, we've approved 5.7 billion cubic feet per day, which is roughly 60% of gutters export today. So that's not a small amount, but there obviously is going to be more in the queue. If you look at the economists' predictions, of course it was prior to recent events, but generally speaking, I would say from the low side of say 5 to the high side of 15 billion cubic feet per day is the kind of range where the economists think the market will end up supporting. The issue right now of getting LNG to Lithuania or anywhere else at the moment is building the facilities. So the first facility is due to come on at the end of this year or early 2016, and 2 others have now put at least, I think, spades into the ground. But the reality is, it's going to be years until this substantial infrastructure is ready to do that. On nuclear energy, I think, for example, you were probably referring to the molten salt reactor as an example of a Back to the Future a possibility. There's no question that there are a number of innovative approaches, many of which had some work done in the 80s, for example, which have some very interesting characteristics, and we are supporting research in those areas. But I got to be practical. We all know that the gestation time of a new nuclear technology is very long, going through the building up through pilot stages and demonstration phases. It's a lot of money involved. It's hard to get from here to there, frankly, and there's the regulatory challenge. So right now, in terms of a new technology, our main focus right now in terms of the deployment end is on small modular reactors, so much smaller reactors built around light water technology. Precisely because it isn't as big a step as going to some of the other technologies. So our view is right now we're trying to work to get some of those deployed in the early 2022 kind of time frame, and while we continue to support at least the research on these alternative approaches that certainly on paper for sure can have some advantages relative to light water reactors. Fuel cells and hydrogen, well, again, lots of progress. The reduction in costs, it's the same theme in fuel cells, has been pretty dramatic. And of course, we saw the first, I think it's fair to say, I think it was the first commercially offered for sale fuel cell vehicle, the Toyota vehicle, announced in California in December. And since it's public, I mean, and we can say that I think the list price they put on that was $57,500. As a reminder, when President Bush, in his State of the Union speech, I think in 2002, announced the Freedom Car, a vice president of one of the major auto companies said, "You want a fuel cell vehicle? I'll sell you a fuel cell vehicle. It'll cost you $1 million." Well, $1 million to $57,500 is pretty good progress in just over a decade. So right now, I think the fuel cell costs have been very, very encouraging as to how they've come down. But of course, the infrastructure, the fueling infrastructure, is just an enormous challenge, frankly, to get there. And I think that events like this are a wonderful opportunity to get out the big picture and inform the public. I have to say, I think the president is very much in tune with obviously with the kind of picture that I laid out. I mean, it's the Climate Action Plan, for one thing, was a major pusher of this, and he has done and continues to do lots and lots of public events on this agenda. In fact, today he's at an auto manufacturing plant, a beneficiary of one of our loan programs. Again, I keep putting that plug in, and it's been quite a few events around also manufacturing, including for energy space, et cetera. I wish we had the solution as to how to get a much bigger and broader audience listening to this story. But I would say, and then I will stop, that there was an interesting little article in the New Yorker just at the end of the year. And it said, this 2014 was a good year for government. That everybody says everything is dysfunctional, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, a number of things were pointed out. By the way, including our loan program, but also where we've come in terms of the deficit. Frankly, the reality of what's happened with the healthcare rollout, a whole bunch of issues, and it was an interesting statement. I'm just repeating what it said. It said, there seems to be a phenomenon. And the example used was the individuals who were incorrectly accused in the press with regard to the Olympic bombing in the United States and the anthrax scare. And said, boy, once those first stories are out, it's hard to get the good story over. So I don't know. There may be a bit of that, but all I can say is we're working it, and other ideas, other venues would be most welcome, because you are right. This is a great news story for our countries, and I think ultimately for the global economy. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. And the cameras in the back remind us that the story is not only here in this auditorium at the Wilson Center, but it's a national story, and we're very glad to be part of helping you make that story happen. So thank you for an excellent and outstanding presentation.
Thank you.
Great to have you here. Yeah, we'll be going off to lunch.